Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read along podcast. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
That is your host, Greg, who somehow still knows very little about the Wheel of Time, even though he usually pretends otherwise.
And that is Tylor, our resident expert, who makes sure you know how much he knows about the Wheel of Time.
It's a lot. Join us each week as we continue our journey through Robert Jordan's great fantasy epic, exploring the books, the television show, ill-advised discussions of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and so much more. Although actually not, it's just that.
Yes, all that and actually nothing else as we travel on, and I know what this means now, through the glass columns.
Yeah, he really doesn't know all that much.
No, you don't know that much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast, in which I, your host, Tylor, literally almost just started my summary without doing an introduction, and I am joined by Greg, who is better at podcasting than me, so always remembers introductions should exist. Greg, how are you feeling now that we are only 1 week away from finishing this book? We did not have the fizzle you originally predicted in The Fires of Heaven.
Yeah, I would say that this book continues to raise in my appreciation of it and in my kind of ranking of it among the other books. I'm not exactly sure where they've settled. I haven't put my mind towards that. But yeah, it was another great, exciting week. Lots going on. I'm curious to see what our conversation is like because it primarily feels like a plot week, but we often, surprise each other with what we end up having to say or what we end up having to do. But it was funny because we recorded the other night and I quickly ran upstairs and read right away. And I was like, okay, time to call Tylor and let's get on a Zoom and finish this out so I can finish the book. But fortunately, in my civilian life, I was also very close to finishing a book. So I kind of got the fulfillment by switching over and finishing that. So, yeah, it's the exciting part of this. And, it's crazy as we get down, again, if people aren't paying attention, we have one more week of new material for this book. And it's crazy just whenever you get there to kind of sit and think. And, we started this in the middle of summer. I remember being kind of sad we wouldn't really finish it during 2024. It was a totally different world back then in so many ways. But, it's fun to kind of see another milestone approaching. So all of that is to say, let's talk about these two chapters and then so I can go finish the book. So we are, if you're not paying attention, talking about Chapter 53, Fading Words, and Chapter 54, To Caemlyn today.
If anyone is paying attention, Greg's life outside of this podcast is his civilian life because he considers this to be roughly the equivalent of military service, but we make him continue to do at least 4 years. Any thoughts on what you kind of experienced here, surprises or kind of overall impressions before I just start summarizing forever and ever and ever?
Well, I will say, I think I was just counting upstairs. I think this is my 5th podcast in like 4 days. So it does start to feel like military service to me, the softest of soft people who has never had to do anything meaningful like actual military service. So, I think I'm just at a fever pitch. I do like when these books get a little plotty, so I'm excited to hear you tell me all the things I read and like twice as many things as I remember.
That is my goal, to remind you of all of the things that if you didn't have me, you'd only remember the 4th time you read these books. Rand watches Moraine and Lanfear fall through the Twisted Stone ter'angreal, and he marvels that the pain is gone, and then he tells Lan that he can't do anything for Moraine, and lightning starts to come from the ter'angreal until it lights on fire, and then the doorway begins to melt as many of the other objects light aflame. Lan says he can no longer feel Moraine's presence, and Egwene is unconscious but being tended by Mat. Cerelia says she is hurt too badly to accompany Rand to Caemlyn, then declares that it will be days before she is ready to go back into Teleron-Riode and says that they will watch her dreams to stop her from doing so without their permission. Aviendha says that she is well enough to go to Caemlyn herself, but Amos says that she is a fool, and that also that Rand is a fool. She seems to think everyone is extremely foolish. And then Rand says that Moghedien and Lanfear are both dead. This is the moment where Amos very specifically calls out Rand for being foolish. Rand blames himself for not being able to kill a woman and therefore allowing this to happen to Moghedien, and Rand notes that the Aiel and a number of the nobles have begun to gather around, and people are starting to notice that something significant has happened. Rand apologizes to Lan for not saving Moghedien, but he says that she was prepared for this and it was a good day to die. Rand says that asks Lan to stay with him as an advisor, but Lan says that Moghedien has passed his bond to another, and now he is compelled to find that person. Moghedien did not want him to die avenging her. He tells Rand to tell Nynaeve if he ever sees her that he has found someone else, but Rand says that she won't believe him, and Lan says they are very similar, and there's a darkness within them, and he tells him to send away any woman who he starts to love. He then leaves, and Rand catches himself thinking how he can use Moghedien's death, and then he finds a private room to try to force himself to grieve, and then he remembers Moghedien's letters and reads them. She says there were 3 ways that things could go at the docks. Lanfear could kill Rand could leave with Lanfear and become Luz Theron, or what happened. Moghedien doesn't know what comes next, and Moghedien says that Lan will understand, and then warns Rand against all Aes Sedai, calling out Varen and Elviaren by name. She asks him to deliver the letter to Tom and makes it clear that she knows who Moghedien is, and Rand wonders how she knew and what her plans were. He starts crying when Sulin enters, and he asks where the maidens were, and she says that he has abandoned them. She breaks one of her spears, asking if Rand intends the maidens to marry and give up the spear, and then she breaks another spear. He holds her in a bond of air to stop her from breaking her 3rd spear, and says he intends to keep the maidens safe as much as possible, and she says that they have chosen this, and all of them want to keep him safe rather than the other way around. Rand admits that he hates to see a woman die, and that is why he protects the maidens, and she says that she is the spear, she has chosen it, and he has no right to take it away. He eventually says he understands, and then asks what happens if she breaks her last spear, and she makes it clear that that would mean she has no honor and no purpose, and she would no longer be a maiden of the spear. She is pleased when he eventually says the maidens may go to Caemlyn with him, and when he leaves, there is a large line of maidens, all of them gathered, clearly prepared to do the same and break their spears if Rand didn't relent. They are pleased to go to battle, baffling Rand, who wonders how they can be cheerful when many of them are likely to die. Mat says that everyone is okay, including Egwene, who will only need to rest for a few days, and Mat says it is time to roll the dice, accidentally in the old tongue, and Rand agrees, thinking he has to live with the choices he has made. This is definitely a chapter that I think we have more to say than happened, and the next one, more happens than we will have to say. What were your thoughts on Fading Words?
I mean, it's primarily kind of an aftermath chapter, right? The kind of fallout from what we witnessed in the last chapter is front and center, and I think it's a bit about closing off pathways and plot lines, and a bit about opening up new ones. So yeah. I would put kind of obviously Lanfear and Moghedien into the close off a plot line and make it clear you can't just go chasing after them, and that they're not about to pop back out of that door by burning it down literally. And then also kind of closing off a plot, or maybe opening up a plot, is Lan, which again, I was frustrated that he didn't get a lot last chapter. In this one, it is very, very Poochie, right? Which is, I have to go home and save my home planet, and he's just going to fly off and do so. And it's clearly meant to show that Moghedien anticipated this, and that she understood what his kind of true emotions would have him do, and sends him off bound to a new pathway. I will say my prediction is that we kind of don't see him for a while. I don't think we're going to start getting Lan POV off with his green mistress now. I feel like this is meant to take him off the board for at least some amount of time.
This is a place where I want to raise a question, and then I will briefly cross the streams in a way that we ordinarily wouldn't, right? So if we're talking about Lan being sent off to someone, we know that the person who he is being sent to is a green, but I don't believe we have a name for that green yet. And there are a few Green Aja sisters who might be especially interesting people for him to end up with. Most notable is the one that comes to mind because we have seen her so much more in the television show as opposed to in the books, and I keep extending this description because I am trying to remember her name off the top of my head, and it is escaping me. It is the woman who is with Varen in the Two Rivers, who has the multiple warders and is constantly sleeping with them. Alana, is that her name?
You're asking me. Look at it. Do you remember our roles on this show? I'm the one who knows nothing. Yes, I mean that is who came to mind for me as well, because again we'll keep it a little vague, but we have seen that Lan and that character get pushed together into a plot essentially on the show. And so that seemed to me to be the obvious candidate. But it seemed most important was that they are far away from here. So Lan is, exit pursued by Bear until some future plot line. So I hadn't remembered that in book world, that person is in the Two Rivers. So that maybe gives me hope that a little ways into the next book, or we've talked about how the next book might be a time jump ahead, that we may in fact see Lan wander into town and get to join that plot line. But I think I remain frustrated because it feels like Lan could be the star of his own book, and he's just kind of left out of everything.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He has very early Fellowship of the Ring Strider issues, right? Eventually, we get this amazing character that is Aragorn, but for the first 500 pages of that book, he's nothing. And it's worth noting, in the span of the Wheel of Time, we are just about at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring. Welcome to 1/3 of the way through this series, Greg Cass. I did want to get your thoughts on the Moraine of it all, because I know last week you were very much like, okay, that's the end of Moraine the Grey, but when does Moraine the White show up? Was very much your reaction. This seems to be Robert Jordan trying to foreclose those thoughts, right? The place where Moraine went lightning and then fire and then melted, and Lan says, I can no longer feel her. He is very clearly trying to signal to us here, Moraine is dead. Do you take those signals, or do you think this is all the red herring and you still know she's coming back?
I think it's 100% the latter. I see those all as we need to not waste time with the door right now, because I think if the door was fine, we would immediately suspect that these characters would go after her or try to intervene in some way. So yeah. I think we do really need that kind of, to steal your comparison, Gandalf down a deep, endless pit, so that we don't assume that she's findable or rescuable right now. But, I think so much of this kind of book series has been built around her, and there's just more to do with this character still.
So I guess then where I'm left is Lan kind of makes his exit, but before he does, he gives Rand some really interesting advice. He tells Rand, if you ever see Nynaeve, tell her I found someone else, and if you ever fall in love with someone, send them away immediately. And I don't know whether this is good or bad advice by Lan. He is obviously in a terrible headspace, and I could see this kind of going either way. But I think it's exactly the advice that Rand doesn't need at the moment where he is having this crisis of confidence around, I should have done more, I should be harder and colder and be willing to kill a woman. That's not the great headspace to be in for someone to tell you, don't love anyone, send them away immediately. I kind of worry about the ramifications of this more than I am actually interested in the why of Lan saying it. What were your thoughts on that moment?
I don't know. I think I was in a mood where I wasn't taking any of it very seriously, because it's kind of like, they're all in the aftermath of this big trauma and they're figuring it out. I found it much more interesting how they're saying goodbye and they're kind of honoring each other in a final way. And I don't mean that I don't think these characters will never speak again, but I think in this moment they believe they might not speak again. So they want to make sure those things don't go unsaid. So then the kind of advice being passed, I don't expect Rand to listen to, but I also don't really think it is that important, right? It's kind of like, let's just say a couple kind of jokey things and then give a formal goodbye, and that's it.
The fact that you just said Lan says a couple jokey things tells me a little something about how you perceive that character. But I think the thing that I just remembered about that as you were saying it is as Lan is walking away, Rand starts giving a couple of lines from, I think it's Shinaran funerals. And I thought that kind of really highlighted what you were saying. Rand very clearly thinks he is saying goodbye to his friend for the last time.
Well, and Lan responds in Manetheren, right?
So Tyshar, Manetheren, and Malki are back and forth to each other, and then as I think he's even like out of earshot, Rand kind of gives him the funeral line.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
Where we go to next then is Moiraine's letter, which has a lot of little interesting details in it. I want to know what you thought about her letter first, and kind of what do you expect to come of this now that you have read it?
It was such a funny little plot device. Like, I will write this and then it will fade away because I don't want it to be a dangling plot thread. And like, sure, magic works that way right in this moment because that's what we need. It was kind of a funny bit to me, but you know, I think the overall theme of the letter was every time you thought you were outmaneuvering me, I was on top of it. And, you know, I don't find that surprising from Moiraine at this point. I think that's kind of what her MO has been, to let the characters around her think they're getting away with something so that she can kind of continue to control them. And so it kind of worked as her parting shot to say, I was in control the whole time. Here's a couple tidbits. See you later.
So the first moment that stood out to me in all of that is her telling him very explicitly what were the options at the dock, right? Because I think it's really important for her, it seems like, to make Rand know that she kind of chose right and didn't do this selfishly, whatever she was doing at the docks. And the other two scenarios are pretty horrific. So any thoughts on that? Or then what follows after is my favorite moment of the letter. Hey, guess what? Don't trust anyone, including name drop Varen.
Well, on the first part, I was thinking a lot about Doctor Strange in the Infinity War Endgame, who sees the infinite futures and of them all figures out the one way for the Avengers to get victory. And then the callback in Endgame when he throws up one finger to, not that one finger, but a different one finger to Tony Stark, which I like that kind of connection in that movie. And so it felt very much like this. Like, I've mapped it all out. This is the one way forward. You kind of just have to trust me at this point. And, you know, I think it all just makes sense what she told him and what she didn't until this moment. He needs to be assured that it was not his choice at all and that he's not to blame for this outcome. And also to be clear that, you know, there was a reason behind this and she hopefully made the right choice.
And then you need to talk about Varen, even if it's only for 10 seconds.
I mean, I do think this has been the theme across this book, that even the Aes Sedai you thought you could trust, you should not be trusting. And the fact that Moiraine would use her last words to throw one more onto the fire of Aes Sedai, I think you've highlighted before when we've talked about Varen, the ways in which she is doing what she is told to do and what makes sense, and then just a little bit extra. And so it makes sense that Moiraine has, again, been a step ahead and sensed those little bits extra and doesn't entirely trust Varen to be doing the right thing.
And therefore, Varen is one of my favorite characters. Someone who you can trust and love that much. And then Moraine's like, no. Immediately intriguing. I guess then the next moment we get is Sulan shows up, and finally we get some resolution to something that has been kind of building in the background subtly and slowly throughout most of this book. The conflict between Rand wanting to protect the maidens and the maidens wanting to protect Rand finally comes to a head, and honestly it's solved fairly quickly once the maidens are just like, look, it's all or nothing with us. What was your thoughts on this conflict, which I think was something that we had been like hinting at and ducking into every once in a while, but this was the first time it was all kind of spelled out for us?
I mean, I don't really care about it. If I'm being honest, it's not bad writing or anything like that. I just feel like it's kind of the BS on Earth stuff that, doesn't appeal to me in knight stories, and I'm using knights because that's usually where you hear about chivalry and so on. And so this like push pull of the gender dynamics and the like two culture clashes, like it never felt to me like it was rising to that level of this could actually threaten things. And now it's weird. It's ironic I'm saying that because last week it kind of rose to that level. And if they'd been around, things would have been a lot different. But it still feels, I think because, as you noted, it's settled so quickly, to me, it doesn't feel all that important. It's like, this is how it's going to be. Oh, okay, that's how it's going to be.
I'm actually just realizing this is the same. There's a nice bit of parallel here between this plot line and Nynaeve's plot line, where the lesson Nynaeve has had to learn throughout most of this book is let Birgitte take responsibility for her own actions and you take responsibility for yours. And the lesson that Rand is learning is you need to let the maidens choose what risks they're willing to take. And so to some degree, I think The Fires of Heaven is the book about our main characters learning to delegate a bit more, which it's a fun little parallel, but I agree with you. It's weird that this is a plot that happens off screen and then is resolved in 3 pages.
Well, and, listeners will recall that The Last Jedi is one of my favorite Star Wars movies. And one of the reasons I like The Last Jedi is because that's the lesson of that movie, right? That being a hero doesn't mean you get all the glory and take care of everybody and you use your long shot hope to save the day. Being a hero is actually being responsible to those around you and to incorporate their strengths into your plot. And I think you're right to say that that's been the lesson of this book. This book, as we start to approach like what were the main themes, seems that the kind of way to be a good leader is present in a lot of these plot lines and seems to be kind of chief on the mind of Robert Jordan here. What does it mean to be a good leader, and how does one do so in a way that respects the people around them?
Yeah, and I think that he's doing a really interesting thing with Rand of kind of saying how much of that is about this kind of hardness versus softness, how much of it is about kind of bridging these cultural gaps, and then there's all of these kind of interpersonal pieces. I find Robert Jordan on leadership to be really fascinating, and this book, I think, does the first instance of really diving into that, but I think it's becoming obvious that this series is going to become more and more about that as kind of political power falls into Rand's hands, and he has to do something about it. Any last thoughts on the chapter or about Matt speaking in the old tongue for the 87th time before we dive into some ill-advised discussion of visual media on a non-visual podcast?
No. Play the theme song.
Do. I don't really have a theme song. So today we are going to be discussing the original cover of The Fires of Heaven. You can Google Fires of Heaven cover. You can go to our Instagram where hopefully Greg will have posted an image. This is an image by Daryl K. Sweet. The version of it that I sent you, Greg, is the full wraparound image. So on the right side is the front cover of the book with Rand and Matt and Avienda in a large city, which is apparently Caemlyn. And then the wraparound is a statue and then a number of armed creatures, which are supposed to be Trollocs, but Daryl K. Sweet, the artist, always draws Trollocs as dudes in weird armor. This is an image that I really enjoy in the sense that it's the first of the Wheel of Time original covers that gets the characters right. Matt looks like Matt, and Rand looks like Rand, and Avienda has red hair. But I still kind of struggle with the amount that these covers fit with the series, where that is not what Caemlyn looks like, and those are not what Trollocs look like. What are your thoughts on this cover, which feels very old school, but in kind of a fun retro way?
I mean, it continues the trend of it looks like fantasy van art for these covers, and it's funny because when I see an image like this, I would have assumed, like, if I saw this book, I'd be like, oh, that's a book from, like, the 70s. And so it's funny to me that these are 90s books, And part of that is, it's clearly using Middle Eastern inspired architecture to kind of be generic, exoticized fantasy world.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel like that's part of the 90s, or it feels like we should have left that behind by the 90s, but maybe that's asking too much of the decade of my youth, my kind of youth. We'll see.
I think the really interesting thing is that Robert Jordan did, right? Robert Jordan is one of the few authors of the era who is really smart about taking different pieces of cultures and fitting them together in odd ways. So it's not just a caricature. It's something kind of more fleshed out than that. And then this artist is like, okay, you got a fantasy series. I'll draw it like the 70s. Got it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It tells you exactly kind of what the series is in terms of tone, but that's all it gives. It shows you, look, this is a fantasy series. It looks just like Conan and all of those other sort of series that came before it, but it doesn't actually give you any of the flavor of this world, right? This is a cover that says generic fantasy. I have no problem with that for the first couple books of the series, but once you get later on, I kind of want to start to acknowledge the series itself instead of just highlighting what the genre is on the cover of the book.
Well, and it's interesting to compare this to last week's cover of the ebook, and I think that is this kind of line that a great hit fantasy series eventually hits, which is you go from just needing to prove to people this is some fantasy you need to read to actually like, oh no, this is a special experience, this is distinctive. As I alluded to before, I grabbed one of the Brandon Sanderson books, and those have kind of the same generic fantasy art despite being pretty new, and so I do think this is just kind of common, and I'm sure some fantasy lovers in the audience might say, like, this is what they want. They want that kind of pulpy fantasy paperback cover, and then it's us fools who demand they have distinctive branded content that are wrong.
I will give the Brandon Sanderson covers, specifically the Stormlight Archive book covers, a good bit of credit. They do a really good job of having the flora, I guess, all of the plants be the weird like rocks with protuberances as opposed to like standard grass that you get in that odd world that he has created. I don't know how far you are in that book, but that may or may not make sense to you. Relook at that cover. There's a couple fun details on it.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm the length into that book where it is sitting on my to-be-read shelf, so it does not make sense to me, but that's all right. So I think we can be agreed that this is fine enough for its time, but we'd pick the Moraine cover from last week, I would say, is the winner of the three, and I might even take my generic, boring colored cover over this one. But I think we should move ahead with the next chapter, sir. So hit us with what I'm sure is a long and detailed summary.
We're going to do our best to make it not that, but chapter 54. To Caemlyn. The maidens follow Rand to the palace where the Aiel are gathered. Rand has overheard the wise ones telling Aviendha that she must protect Rand and that things would be easier if she had succeeded, but they clearly don't want Rand to overhear. Rand wonders if Aviendha is the same as Colaver's women who have been sent to try to tempt him, and Matt points out that he has been staring at Aviendha while lowering her from his horse, and that makes him look very much in love with her. Rand says that all the Aiel will not be able to come, but Bael, the leader of them, says all who can will. Bael has heard of the trouble down by the river, and Rand calls it a great victory, but worries that rumors of it will mean significant problems for him in Caerhien. Rand creates a gateway, and it's approximately 4 paces wide, the largest it can be, and he steps through onto a platform and makes it as large as he can, and Moghedien seems impressed by how large it is. The Aiel crowd in as many of them as possibly can, and once it is full, they depart, seemingly floating in full darkness. Moghedien warns that if they are too close to Ravin when they emerge, he will feel it and be able to channel at them. Rand says he knows where to go. At this point, one of the Aiel falls into nothingness, and Rand worries what that is going to mean for that person, and then he also worries that it was a maiden until Sulin gives him a look for worrying about the maidens. Rand then thinks he needs to harden himself if he is going to risk soldiers like this. They arrive, and Rand opens a gateway to the garden where he originally met Elaine. He thinks about Lan's advice about women, and he realizes he doesn't know which of the women he is seemingly in love with he wants, and the Aiel fan out, and then at this point, the wall that they are near explodes, with Murdrail and Trollocs pouring out through the new gaps in the wall. Rand channels to protect the inner city from Raven's lightnings, and Mat and Aviendha seem to be down after the explosion, and Moghedien is more or less completely cooked. Rand feels Aviendha's cheek and realizes that she has died, and Mat is smoking, and Rand begins to rage and then channels to kill several Trollocs and charges off after Raven. We then switch into Nynaeve's point of view, who uses the channeling ter'angreal to enter Teleron Riod and instructs Siwan, who is still mad at the concoction that was needed to put her to sleep during the day. Nynaeve is frustrated that all of her time is going to training the Aes Sedai and Siwan, and that she has little time left to investigate Stilling. She is also frustrated that Faolain has been promoted above accepted, but is not quite Aes Sedai, and so Faolain is able to use her authority over her to make her run numerous tasks. And Siwan realizes that the real cause of Nynaeve's irritation is that Theodrin has been trying to break her block, and she has been failing. Nynaeve hits back at Siwan, mocking her for not doing Gareth Bryne's chores well enough, and then at this point, Siwan gets slapped, and then they begin to fight one another, before eventually Siwan begins laughing at two grown women in a physical fight. Siwan says that they can settle their disagreements like adults, but they also doesn't mention but also says never to mention Gareth Bryne in front of her again. After a pause, Nynaeve agrees, and they basically agree to be civil, and then Nynaeve says that they should return after she sees a face in a window, and Nynaeve seems to be panicked by this, but Siwan insists on more training until she wakes up, at which point Nynaeve rips the necklace, which included the ring ter'angreal, off of Siwan's neck, and she wakes into the real world. At this point, Nynaeve shifts into Jareen, which she thinks is one of the few places that she knows how to teleport to, but Moghedien doesn't associate with her. She considers waking, but worries that Moghedien knows Saladar now, and so they wouldn't be able to do anything if she did strike, and eventually she decides that there is nothing to do but to eventually wake up and tell the others, and at this point Moghedien appears, saying it is time to kill Nynaeve because they have been wasting too much time. Brigitte arrives, shocking Nynaeve, and fires an arrow, but Moghedien dismisses it and begins to mock Brigitte for being in the flesh without Guide Alkane. Nynaeve stands and sees that Brigitte has been turned into a scared child by the powers of Teleron Riod, who is begging not to be hurt. Nynaeve crawls as close as she can to Moghedien without rousing her suspicion, and then she summons in her mind the image of an Adam around Moghedien's neck, which gives her full control and prevents Moghedien from being able to channel. She is then able to punish Moghedien using the Adam and stop her from dismissing it by forcing her to kind of keep the idea strong in her mind. Brigitte is restored and explains that she used the ring to help Nynaeve after seeing Siwan wake, and Nynaeve feels embarrassed that she considers leaving without Brigitte, but when she admits this to Brigitte, she says that what she did is what matters, not what she thought. Moghedien says that she can be helpful, and she reveals the plot of the other Forsaken to trap Rand, and Nynaeve says that she is just looking for a way to escape by prolonging the time that she is trapped, but Nynaeve says that she will hurt her if she holds anything back, and Moghedien tells her of Rand and of Morghase's supposed death, and of the trap that Raven has now set. Brigitte says that Nynaeve has seemingly kind of cowed Moghedien and gotten her to actually tell the truth, and Nynaeve believes that she needs to get to Caemlyn in order to help as much as possible. Brigitte says that Nynaeve will not be able to do anything to affect the real world in Teleron Riod, but Nynaeve says that she must go anyways, and she departs. This is both an action-packed chapter and a chapter that sets up next week. What were your overall thoughts? And then hit me with your initial impressions of Rand traveling to Caemlyn.
Well, I will say the biggest surprise to me of this chapter is that we go to Nynaeve halfway through, right? Like, I was kind of really getting into the action in Caemlyn and is like, oh, all right, let's go. Let's see what's happening here. Just to, like, suddenly, shockingly be ripped away and you know, put back in the other plot line. And of course, it's clear why those start to come together at the end, and I'm excited to see where they go. But it was a pretty big surprise in the center there. To transition over to the Rand plotline, I will say I still continue to have trouble picturing these platforms in the dark and so on. It's not entirely effective to me because I can't visualize it, and it feels to me, I guess my question ends up becoming whether this is fair or not, I will let you judge, but it becomes like, well, why isn't it just a doorway, right? Like, why do we need this extra step in this extra middle piece? And maybe there is a good reason for that, but because it's hard to visualize, it's like, I'd rather this is just something closer to like Philip Pullman, where you just cut a knife between dimensions and go there. But I'm open to either.
It is worth noting we are now on book 5 of the Wheel of Time, and I think that this is our 5th consecutive book that gives us a new way to get places, right? We started with the ways, and then we had the portal stones, and then we had like accidental teleportation, and then we had like these what's called skimming, where you create a gateway to an in-between place, and then you go on a platform to some other in-between place. All of these things, at some point, we either have to trust that Robert Jordan is going to justify why all of them must exist, or, boy, is there a bunch of wasted potential here. So hang on, I guess, is what I have to say about that, but not a whole lot else. I think that
and I'll just throw in that I did really like the moment of the guy falling off the back because it actually made me think of Phantom Menace, where at the end all the starships like take off, and one of my favorite details is the tank blows up one, and so you see all the heroic starfighters and just that like one guy cruising way down and crashing into the trees, and it kind of felt like that, like you were almost an immortal hero, friend, but you fell off the back, which admittedly would probably be me in whatever the equivalent version of this would be in our real world.
I just like to point out, on Wheel of Time Internet, this dude is more of a hero than any other Aiel. He is the most remembered of all of the Aiel, the dude who is still falling through the darkness to this day.
Well, and we wouldn't be us without noting on The Good Place, when the judge flicks Trevor and Trevor flies on forever. It's very much that, and Rand's thought of, will the madness get you before anything else does, seems about right.
Yeah, I don't want to think about that anymore. The beginning of the chapter is really interesting in that we do get confirmation of something that I think both of us had largely dismissed like 2 books ago, right? I think we were both under the impression that Aviendha was maybe sent to Rand with some intention of having her spy on him, but very quickly she kind of rejected all of the Wise Ones' kind of assertions that they get together in any way. Now, at the beginning of this chapter, it seems like those conversations are still ongoing, and the Wise Ones still seem to think that Aviendha has not succeeded yet. And the fact that Rand overhears this and then immediately starts thinking, is Aviendha the same as the women Colliver was sending, that kind of sets off red flags of, like, how much is this going to be messing with his head going forward, especially if, end of the chapter, something happens to Aviendha.
Well, and I don't know why, but in that particular moment, and they were using kind of innuendo, it felt to me like it was almost like she needed an heir, right? It kind of felt like they were trying to get her not just to kind of control Rand, but to create offspring. And I don't know if that's right or not. It just is kind of the implication in that moment that stuck out to me, that like, that is certainly a way to tie his fate to the Aiel more strongly, although we do know he's probably of Aiel blood. So it's, well, I don't know why I said probably. He is, right? We know that for sure. So it felt, for some reason that stood out to me, but it did just feel like, it's another one of those relationships Rand can no longer rely on, and that's probably the most important takeaway.
Yeah, and I thought just the moment that kind of followed that, with Matt basically being like, oh, I'm really oblivious, but even I can tell there's something between the two of you. I think that kind of stands out to me as we just had a major moment where Rand is probably thinking about putting the kind of women in his life at risk, and then immediately afterwards, like just a casual observer who hasn't even been in the city for several days is able to immediately pick out like who's the woman that Rand is interested in. That, I think, kind of has to mess with you. Simultaneously, Bale and the Aiel have already heard rumors about what went on down by the docks, and that kind of gives Rand 2 simultaneous kind of lit fuses, it feels like. There are a lot of kind of rumors that could be dangerous for him flying around right now.
And because of where we are in the book, it's like, yep, and that'll all just continue to stew next book, I think, right? Like that, it doesn't feel like we're intending to resolve any of this now. It's just showing how messy things are, and that this seemingly won't be a very neat and tidy ending.
At this point, I'll be honest, I can probably skip to "and then a wall exploded" and not have too much else to say about this chapter, right? There's a lot of plot here, which is awesome. I'm glad it happened, but that's often when we have less to say. Any thoughts on the before things explode, and then what are your thoughts on things exploded?
Well, I'm going to jump right to things exploding to say that, this again was another surprise. Like, we expected this kind of confrontation between the Forsaken and Revan. And so it felt like, okay, that's where we're headed. And now we see that outside of that, Revan has just kind of sacrificed all of Caemlyn.
Raven,
or someone has.
Just to be clear.
What? Say it again?
Raven, not Revan.
Raven.
Revan is the Sith Lord.
Oh, either way. That Raven has seemingly sacrificed the city, or someone has sacrificed the city in order to make this trap, right?
Yeah.
That it's not that they are happily ruling Caemlyn. It's that Caemlyn is burning, and it's the end of the line for this city, overrun with Trollocs. Beautiful cover of the book demonstrates.
Yeah, it is worth noting all of this is taking place within like 10 feet or so of the palace, so we don't know how much of this extends outside of that, but at bare minimum, the palace crawling with Trollocs and Murdrail, very bad sign for anyone inside of the palace. Some really important characters are smoking on fire and checked for pulse and it's not there. Where are you at on a bunch of major characters lying on the ground at the end of this chapter?
They're fine. I mean, when it's that many all at once, it's like, it's we've already lost a main character in this chunk of the book. It feels like next time it'll be like, oh, I am revived, I'm healed, I'm back. So I'm not really too worried about either of them. Plus, there's just so much going on with them that this couldn't possibly be the end of their plot lines.
Valid. We then jump into Nynaeve's point of view, and boy, do we have a lot of really interesting setup for next book before we get to the fight with Moghedien, right? We learn that Nynaeve has been training both Aes Sedai and Siwan. We get this really interesting question of how is Siwan actually getting her hands on these ter'angreal. We learn that there is now a level in between Aes Sedai and Accepted, and that Nynaeve's kind of social rival has that position. And then I think the most intriguing update here, we learn that Theodrin, one of the Aes Sedai, has been tasked with breaking Nynaeve's block so that hopefully she will be able to channel without being angry. And that feels like a setup for a really interesting something to happen going forward. But for now, boy, is this a bunch of hints and innuendo. Any of it stand out to you or kind of intriguing before we move on to this book plot?
Well, I think I was, again, trying to figure out, is Nynaeve as low as she's gotten? And this all hinted at she's on her way back up, right? That we're going to empower her and we're going to do this. Like, yes, she's been humbled and is beneath almost everybody you just listed out. But the fact that everybody wants to build her up and get her in control of her powers, that last piece about trying to break through the block felt to me like, I'm going to forget what the lessons are, but when Snape starts training Harry to is it
Legilimency or something like that?
Yeah. Where it has to start training him to control his mind and block out Voldemort from controlling his thoughts. It feels like this is going to be important, and we're going to have to build this character up to get to it.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's a really interesting kind of place for Nynaeve to be, is right now it seems like she is simultaneously in a position to learn a lot and grow a lot, and is also in this position of teaching, and knowing Nynaeve, figuring out how to have both of those roles without kind of slipping between them is going to be a big problem going forward. But then I think some much more interesting stuff happens, right? Like, I think this Moghedien confrontation, as you say, is absolutely out of nowhere. And because of that, I think really works in just how quickly and efficiently we get to kind of the core of this and immediately get to the emotional moments, right? I think this works for me in a way that very often in Robert Jordan, I'm like, I want less action. Here, I was almost like, maybe more.
Yeah, I would just agree that it totally works. And I will say, I just want to make sure I have the details right. I mean, she essentially thinks up the Adam just like they've been rethinking their outfits, right? It's that kind of matrix. You can just conjure whatever you think about. And so the fact that this had not kind of occurred to anyone or me as like a potential way to really control, but it's like poof, just like that, you put a collar around them and you now have a pet Forsaken. That seems hugely powerful and really kind of intriguing as how far this will go. There's a little side of it that's like, you know, using the tools of the master against them, which feels like, should we be so satisfied with this dark a power being wielded by somebody we thought it was good? But when it comes to controlling one of the most evil entities we've encountered, then it's like, yep, sure, do it. Cross that line.
Yeah, and I think the thing that was really interesting is, as you say, this is not just kind of using the evil of the Seanchan and the Adam to be able to conquer Moghedien. It's also beating Moghedien at her own game, right? She seems to be the only person who claims to be better at working in Tylor and Rand than Lanfear is. And so to kind of get her with the trick of believing something to be true, which is exactly what she's doing to Brigitte at the moment that she is captured, I think that kind of irony works really effectively here. It was also a really nice move by Robert Jordan, I think, to get Brigitte involved in this conflict. It was both a believable reason for Moghedien to be distracted enough to fall for this, and it kind of gave us that like full circle moment from when she was kicked out of Tylor and Rand, what, like 500 pages ago or so?
Well, and the fact that they set it up with Siuan asking the questions and demonstrating that you don't have to channel, like, and yet that didn't really tip the hand to me that Brigitte could come back in and be a part of this. So it all kind of works. Maybe the piece, since we're praising Robert Jordan, the piece that didn't work is like suddenly she's a child upset. I'm like, whatever. I didn't really love that, but overall the confrontation really worked.
The only moment of that kind of she is a child thing that worked for me, I agree with you. It did not when she was a child, but the moment when Brigitte talks about what it felt like, it almost reminded me of like Get Lost, right? Like that kind of feeling of emptiness and not quite being able to influence your own life is just a horrifying feeling that I thought was really well described, even if Nynaeve seeing it from the outside really wasn't effective at all. I guess where we're left then is Nynaeve is going to Caemlyn, and it feels like she won't be able to affect anything, but why would Robert Jordan bring her there if she couldn't affect something? What are you looking forward to at the end of this? Was there anything else in this Tylor and Rand confrontation that stood out, or do you just want to go upstairs and finish this book?
I just want to go upstairs and finish this book. It's very cold in my basement. But, you know, I don't really have any concrete predictions outside of, as you just implied, this has to matter, and she will start to affect what's going on there. And it feels a little bit like a really big kind of explosion is going to happen here. How we define that, I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like something that will have lasting effects is going to come of all of this. And I'm guessing we might start to get a little bit of an answer about the relationship between Tylor and Rand and reality. I'm sure not a final answer. I'm sure the kind of answer that only raises more questions, but I want to learn a little bit more, as you just alluded to, about all the ways to travel. I want some answers about this larger mythology. I think we're due some, so that's my hope.
They will come at some point. Probably not next week. Next week, we will be reading the final two chapters of The Fires of Heaven. That is Chapter 55, The Threads Burn, and Chapter 56, Glowing Embers. There is some like prophecy or something after it. Read the whole book. You don't need to read the glossary, but finish the book before our next episode. I'm excited for y'all to finish it. I also want to take this moment to look ahead just a little bit. Our next episode is obviously the final reading for The Fires of Heaven. We'll discuss those two chapters. The following week will be our usual wrap up the book, do a game, discuss how we feel about things overall. The week after that, we will be starting Book 6, Lord of Chaos. It is worth noting, Book 6 starts with the longest prologue in the history of prologues. We're going to attempt to do it all in 1 week, which means that even after you finish The Fires of Heaven, don't just stop reading. Start kind of working your way through that prologue over the next couple weeks. It's double the length of most of the weeks that we do on this podcast. So, look ahead.
I'm just going to confirm, because I happen to have my mass market paperback right here of Lord of Chaos. It is a full 74 pages. So Tylor's not messing around. So absolutely work on locating that book. Use your nice independent bookstore if you can. And then we will look forward to a lot of discussion of that prologue. And we will not do that next time, but we'll do a few other things, and then we'll get there through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, Amazon, or our wives. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, find us on Instagram or Threads by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being a part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, leave us a review wherever you are listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time on Through the Glass Columns.